So what you do is decide on the finished border width, add your seam allowance, and then sew on the border. I mitered the corners on this border, but you could just square them off at the ends as well. Using freezer paper, which can be now found in many quilt stores, as well, of course, as the paper section of the grocery store, I marked and cut strips to fit behind the border. I used 3/4 inch spacing between the rows for the writing. Press the marked paper, glossy side to the back of each border piece. The heat of the iron will temporarily adhere the paper to the back of the fabric. If you will be kerning the writing around the corners, be sure the lines go around the corners. Using a fine tip Sharpie marker or other permanent type marker that will work with fabric and the words assembled and printed, thoughtful words can be written around the border. Do not begin right at a corner, but instead begin midline somewhere and then run the words around the corner as you see it. On subsequent rows, stagger the beginning of the writing so everything does not align one under the other. After the writing is completed, remove the freezer paper. Since I live far away from this couple, I did all the handwriting around the quilt border. I think it would be wonderful to do a graduation quilt, a birthday quilt, or some other commemorative type quilt and have guests at a party write their own thoughts in their own hand around the border.
Next, cut a piece of water-soluble stabilizer large enough to cover the fabric and batting, and then pin it in place over the pillow top fabric. Use a fine point permanent marker, and for this project I use a Sharpie brand line black pen. Draw lines on the top of the water-soluble stabilizer, simulating wind swirls. Test some designs on plain paper before doing the final drawing on the stabilizer. And then audition some decorative and even embroidery threads to use for stitching over the drawn lines. Using an open toe embroidery foot for the machine, stitch directly on top of those drawn lines. The stitching on top of the fabric and batting is going to create a quilted effect. Begin looking for old ties with colorful patterns that complement one another and create a memorable seasonal pillow. Pull the yarn all the way out to remove it completely. Now, on each side of that yarn that was pulled out, find one yarn to the left, one yarn to the right side, and then pull those out as well. Once the fabric is prepared, using the twin needles to stitch is next. The machine should already be set up for stitching. A longer stitch length will allow the stitches to stand out and actually become part of the texture and the design in the fabric. When stitching, keep the open areas between the twin needles as shown. Stitch slowly and methodically to allow each stitch to be formed. Begin at one end and sew to the end of the first line. Continue sewing over all those gap lines, sewing in one direction. When all the lines are sewn over in one direction, turn the cloth and then sew over all the open lines in the other direction. Where the open areas intersect, just continue stitching. This is a great gift idea when paired with the accompanying banded napkins found in the project section of this website.